What if you owned a house in a beautiful garden? Would you share it with others? Would you welcome them? What if your guests decided to stay? Would it still be your house? That's how Price Paid, the fight for First Nations survival, begins. It's a book that taught me a lot about Native and newcomer relations when I first read it 6 years ago for gritLIT, Hamilton's literary festival. And I thought, who better to talk with today than the author, Bev Sellars. And she joins us this morning from the West Coast, and I'm going to get you to pronounce the nation that you're from.
I am from the Secwepemc Nation in what is now known as British Columbia.
Okay, thank you very much, and so great to speak with you again. I was always struck by just the simple idea of your book, because you have a law degree, you have a history degree, you've been a chief twice, and yet you could see how newcomers just didn't understand why relations are not great.
That's true, and it really struck me when I went to work for the BC Treaty Commission. And here were federal people, provincial people, and Indigenous people sitting around a table negotiating a treaty. And it became obvious to me that they had no idea why they were there. I mean, they were coming, you know, with whatever their bosses told them to say, but they had no idea. So Stephen Point was the chief commissioner at the time, and I asked him to put together something to educate people on the history, you know, because if you don't include, I mean, history consists of the stories we tell ourselves, and if you don't include all the good, the bad, and the ugly, then, you know, our understanding of ourselves is erroneous. Mm-hmm. So I did put that together and took it out and went all over BC with the presentation.
And so many people ask about it, and so many people learn from it, that you ended up writing this book.
Yeah, the Price Paid is an extension of the presentation that I put together. And, you know, people need to understand that Indigenous people are not just a chapter in Canadian history. We need to be front and center in every chapter. And if we're not there, then people should ask, well, why aren't they there? You know, where are they? What happened? And to really understand Canadian history, those questions need to be asked.
Because it really talks about the tilting of power.
Yes, yes. And in the beginning of the book, I document all, you know, what Indigenous people have given to the world. And that, I mean, that's in the forms of government, in the forms of foods, in the forms of medicines, in the form of sports, in the form of architecture, and it just goes on. But then, you know, when Indigenous people were no longer needed, then, you know, we were put on reserves, and we became kind of a stumbling block to a different culture. And so laws were put in place to either get rid of us permanently or to at least get us out of the way.
And the fact you outline many times about the potlatches, how you weren't even allowed to meet.
Yeah, I mean, it was at one point it was against the law for what they, you know, Indians to gather in groups of more than 3, unless you were family or unless you went to church, you know. So it was really difficult to gather and talk about the issues, but you know, Indigenous people found ways of getting around that, you know, and some were caught and put in jail, but it was really difficult trying to keep the issues that never died. They're still alive today. Mm-hmm. And so they had to think of creative ways to gather to talk about issues.
So the book was written a few years ago. Have you seen positive changes in that time?
I think people are starting to really understand, take interest in the history, the real history of Canada. I mean, Price Paid, I'm proud to say, has been made a mandatory textbook at the UBC Sauder School of Business. I think this is the 5th year now. So people are starting to, you know, not just my books, but other books that Indigenous people have written are making their way into the curriculum. And I think that's really important. And I'm told the reaction from my book is You know, people are really angry at the way Indigenous people were treated and still are today. So I think it's you know, we're not making leaps and bounds, but we're making small steps, taking small steps to make sure people are educated.
It is a powerful book from a powerful woman. Bev Sellars, thank you again for chatting with us. Again, the book is Price Paid, The Fight for First Nation Survival.